Hello and welcome everyone to this introduction of a new partnership between Outbound Pharma and Zeeks. I'm Dr. Elisabeth Kugler, the director of Zeeks, which provides corporate science communication services, including copywriting, illustration, and podcast as a service. And today it is my pleasure to introduce to you a very new and exciting collaboration between Outbound Pharma and Zeeks, which truly promises to transform how B2B science marketing is done, particularly through the power of podcast. So with me today are two amazing guests from Outbound Pharma, who are Dr. Gordan Vidovic, the CCO, and Dr. Claudio Rota, the CEO of Outbound Pharma. So firstly, a huge and warm welcome to both of you, Claudio and Gordan. Maybe you can very briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Outbound Pharma.
Hello, my name is Gordan Vidovic, the Chief Commercial Officer at Outbound Pharma. With some 24 years of experience in the healthcare sector, my expertise lies in commercial operations, business development, corporate strategy, and management consulting. I joined Outbound Pharma this year with a clear vision and shared values of how to enhance business development for life sciences companies, including CRO, CDMOs, API and chemical manufacturers, and other service entities. Through our interactions with clients, we identified that lead generation frequently serves as a significant bottleneck in business development, consuming some valuable time and resources. Nevertheless, we adopted a different approach that emphasized quality over quantity, prioritizing and cultivating meaningful relationships. Our team and I actively engage within our networks and participate in major conferences globally, offering some immediate opportunities, but also long-term strategic insights on market fit and value propositions. Also, along with managing essential top-of-the-funnel activities like appointment setting and other business growth activities. Ultimately, our focus is on fostering relationships with prospects that lead to conversions, rather than simply delivering unqualified leads that yield no results.
So I'm Claudio Rota. I am the CEO and founder of Outbound Pharma. I have been in the life science industry for about 20 years, specializing in business development, corporate strategy, and management consulting. In 2017, we founded Outbound Pharma with primarily one vision, which was to help life science companies and especially service providers level up their business development efforts. So as we worked with clients, we realized that as Gordan said before, the real bottleneck in business development was usually lead generation. So really the top of the funnel, which is still a huge drain on time and resources for most companies. So we decided to do things a little differently, focusing more on quality over quantity and prioritizing the building of relationships within the industry. So my team and I collaborate very closely within our own personal network and participating in leading conferences worldwide, which provides not just near-term opportunities for our clients, but also long-term prospects, as well as strategic advice on topics like market fit and value proposition primarily. And we handle all of the top of the funnel tasks like appointment setting. So at the end of the day, it's about helping our clients build stronger relationships with prospects that actually convert. So rather than just providing lots of poorly qualified leads that are not really going to turn into potential clients in the future. So that in a nutshell is what we do.
Thank you so much both for this really great introduction. It's always really exciting to talk to the life scientists who are also involved in business development. I remember when I started my own business, I was really overwhelmed with all the terminology, all the work that had to be done, and especially setting up top of the funnel tasks like appointment setting and having a lot of unqualified leads. So it's definitely a service that is absolutely needed. And as you mentioned, the great thing is also that obviously you tap into your own personal networks across the world. And I think that is very important because that means you know the people that you're working with, you know their work, and you know what is important to all of them on their individual levels as well. So I think also now moving on from a little bit kind of understanding what you do in terms of work, I think what we want to talk about today is the importance of understanding science communication in B2B marketing with a focus on podcasts, because obviously we want to speak a little bit more about the role of podcast. And also because we're here on a podcast, it's the perfect platform to talk about it. So as a scientist myself, I know that science communication is sometimes kind of an afterthought. Like I know when I was in the lab or working on anything R&D, I didn't really think about how should I market or how should I communicate my work. And that was really kind of an issue for myself because I did the work, but I didn't really share the work. And so I couldn't have the whole impact that I needed for my work to really be distributed as far and widely as possible. But I think also what makes science communication and also science business development so critical is that you not only need to understand the communication and business development, but also the science. So these can be complex topics such as, for example, working with a very complex R&D project, but also in science, we work with emotionally difficult projects, such as, for example, sometimes with cancer or patients. And we also work with ethically difficult topics, such as, for example, organoid research and AI are still very highly debated. And so having clear communication strategies and knowing how to work with different service and business providers is really, really important. And so, Gordan, I thought maybe you can share your perspective on what makes good science communication effective for us.
A good science communication is effective when it distills complex information into clear, relatable message that resonate with the target audience. I think it's about telling the story behind the science in its meaningful way, why it matters and how it impacts real lives, but also how it impacts the companies and the partners that we work with. So engaging communication can bridge the gap between intricate scientific concept and the understanding of non-experts, mostly business people and maybe not related to the science in its wide range, but making it essential for fostering trust and collaboration in the industry. And I think this is why scientific communication is quite important and how actually it's performed.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, like you said, the width and the breadth of people that we want to speak to. There are so many different shareholders and non-experts involved in science communication that it's really important to know who the audience is and how to repackage and reformat any kind of messaging to a wider audience. So great. Thank you so much for sharing. So now that we're wanting to launch this partnership between Outbound Pharma and Zeeks, it would be great to hear a little bit more about, Outbound Pharma's strong B2B strategy background. And so, Claudio, with you, we have the perfect candidate to learn a little bit more about how we can intersect both our talents and both our focuses on making complex science engaging and accessible to the audiences.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elisabeth. Well, the truth is that when we're talking about business development, the scenario has changed dramatically since even just a few years ago. And today, the key is really about leveraging multiple channels. And more companies are understanding this. And so it's no longer about just focusing on emails or LinkedIn. So we want to use all possible channels available. And it's increasingly difficult to do so, right? So it does require a lot of resources. And podcasts in particular are such a powerful platform. Somewhere a few weeks ago, I've read that there are probably about 1 billion blog posts on the web today. And if we compare that to the number of podcasts, which is only about 4 million, there's a huge gap. So I think podcasts are still a largely underutilized channel. And especially in the life science industry, we don't have that many. And so there are not that many options available for people to choose from. And many professionals working in this space that can handle the complexity of science and technical podcasts.
Absolutely. And I also think what makes podcasts so special is that obviously it's humans talking to humans. So you always have this very emotional compartment to it. And we can really use this to relate to the audiences that are listening to the podcast. And you've touched on it that there is not that many podcasts out there, especially not in the science field. But why do you think it is so effective in reaching especially scientific audiences and decision makers?
Well, the reason I think that they're very effective is because, first, they're still relatively new, but largely it's because they enable us to make very complex information and transform it into audible stories that can be easily consumed because you can actually listen to it anywhere, anytime. And they do inspire people to take action. So, I think every company, regardless of their history, DNA, or cultural background, has a unique story to tell. And of course, this is especially true for companies that are creating transformative products, but also for the service providers. Services that at the end of the day, they impact the life science community and patients. So this isn't just for B2C companies like pharma or diagnostic or medical device manufacturers, but it's also for service providers within the life sciences who may have a powerful narrative or story to tell that needs to be heard. So the podcast allows these companies to amplify their message and connect them with the right decision makers. And it helps them to stand out even in very competitive markets. For example, regulatory services or some, let's say, traditional IT services, for example.
Definitely. And I like what you said about podcast is a great platform to actually break down complex data into audible stories that people can just take with them and listen to them anywhere and anytime. I love that because, yes, we can just, plug into YouTube or any other platform and just listen to a podcast on the go while you're, for example, in the car or, for example, on the train and just listen to the story of a company that you want to know more about. So that is definitely a really, really good platform for that. Also, as you mentioned, we're all in the sciences kind of sharing similar goals. We want to contribute to human knowledge, and we also want to connect to the decision makers to form and shape sciences and leave the world effectively in a better place. So maybe, Claudio, you can also share some goals you hope to achieve through this partnership.
Well, one of the biggest goals, of course, is that we want to achieve with this partnership is to ensure that our clients get the spotlight they deserve, and they can do so faster. Of course, we only work with, we usually work with high-profile companies that have reputable history and brands. So all we need is really be able to get to the right decision makers. With our lead generation and appointment setting services, we can get to the right people, but together with Zeeks' ability to make these professional podcasts that can turn these complex topics into very engaging content, we'll make sure the message hits home. So this is what this partnership is all about. It means that for our clients, their brand doesn't just compete in the marketplace, but it stands out in really in a crowded space, and it draws in the right customers. Leveraging a scientific podcast, we can keep audiences more connected. It will enable us to build more trust and create lasting relationships. And when we bring together smart communication and targeted campaigns, we can see better results and see them faster. So at the end of the day, it's really about helping our clients to be more successful.
which is always the best thing possible. Happy clients is always a good thing. But also, as you mentioned, we really deliver quality in multiple ways by merging Outbound Pharma and Zeeks. You have this fantastic business development, especially at the top of the funnel, appointment setting and other business development strategies, which is amazing, as well as your great network and the people you work with. And combining that with the Zeeks content strategy and content creation, I think our customers are in for a real treat. And I think we also have this shared commitment of really wanting to enhance the visibility of science-focused companies across the globe in really the highest quality possible. Outbound Pharma and Zeeks both really work with long-term clients and build relationships. And we both are very, very proud of having successful long-term customer relationships globally and over very long periods of time. And I think by merging both our companies in this relationship and joint strategic partnership, it's great that we can really cover a lot of the marketing funnel, where we have the business development side of Outbound Pharma with really creating a lot of awareness and creating targeted leads and appointment setting. And then we have the content strategy and content production from Zeeks, really helping to create content that leads to customers down the funnel. So I'm really excited that we can join in the strategic partnership and really join the best quality of both sides possible. And I think, as you also touched on, in recent years, podcast has become a really influential tool. I mean, we all know the most famous podcasts, and I think most people will have listened to a podcast at one time or another, and it's a great tool in content marketing. But especially, as you also said, it's a really great tool in our industry in biotech and life sciences, because it is very innovative. And so when we talk about innovations and education, such as in biotech and pharma, it is great to use a platform that is not so overly used, such as, for example, a blog or normal websites. So having a new and fresh platform where we deliver professional podcasts is really important for companies that maybe want to produce a new and novel content for their companies. Also, there are about 500 million podcast listeners worldwide. So there is definitely a huge audience that are interested into podcasts and podcast production. And so I think, podcast is definitely great, but especially science podcast is also great, because we can talk about high quality of R&D, about products, about services. We can present companies and the people behind the scenes. We can talk about the stories about, for example, how discoveries have come to play, or how, for example, a company deals with company strategy and leadership, which is also important if we want to get to know a company and build trust and relationships over long periods of time. But also, talking is really nice because you can really introduce this unique storytelling angle. You can talk to people about how their company started, when they, for example, went to market, what struggles they had, what makes them unique, and what is important to them, and what their values and mission are for the future. And so we obviously hope to provide all of this for our clients with, high quality production, scientific accuracy, and a very unique storytelling angle. But what do you think makes a science podcast production service unique, Gordan?
Elisabeth, I think it's something that really sets us and our services apart, is our deep understanding of life sciences industry and our commitment to scientific rigor, which actually very well resonates with a high quality production and a scientific accuracy that we want to strive for, and actually that we want to justify. We prioritize not only the storytelling aspect, which is important, especially regarding the business development and stories that actually provide a big picture of some of the partners and the companies that we want to present, but also ensuring that the content is factually accurate and relevant to our audience. So by collaborating with industry experts and leveraging our extensive network, we can really create compelling narratives that drive engagement and foster community around the science.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, because as you say, podcast is not just about the content. It's also about the people and the companies and what we do with it. And what we also know is that a lot of the listeners actually listen to a podcast to get to know the speakers, to get to know the companies, and really build also long-term relationships with the companies by just listening to, for example, a podcast. So a podcast can be used to transform like an unknown product or company or service into something more approachable and something with a personality and something that people can relate to. So now that we spoke a little bit about impact, Claudio, maybe you can share what are some of the key benefits for scientific companies to actually use a podcast as part of their overall business development strategy.
Absolutely. As we said before, I think it's really increasingly hard to compete with all the blogs and hundreds of millions of blogs that clutter the internet these days. But in life science, podcasting, things are a little different. You don't have as much competition. So podcasting is trendy. It's becoming a really valuable, interesting marketing channel. And it's feasible for businesses of all sizes, from whether you're a company that has less than 10 employees to companies that have more than 500 or 1,000 employees. So I think the real challenge isn't so much about launching a podcast, but it's about making a mark. So how can you actually make sure that your podcast can stand out? How do you ensure that it's accurate and that your voice is being heard? So the answer is you have to know how to do it the right way. So it needs to be done professionally. If we look at surveys that I've seen recently, most respondents, probably about 70%, they're looking for some form of entertainment. But equally, they also want to be informed. So whoever is responsible for the podcast, they need to understand the subject matter. The quality of content is very important. And also the host personality is equally important, right? So because that goes back to the entertainment and engagement. So if execution is done right, podcasts can be a very powerful medium, as I said before, for entertainment and brand awareness, which is something you don't really get from other outreach channels, like, for example, emails or calls.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. And I think especially, as you said, podcast has this kind of aspect of entertainment to it, but we also know that a lot of people tune into podcasts to actually learn something. And according to Edison research, about 74% of podcast listeners actually tune in to learn something. And I think that is what makes science podcasts super exciting, because we can use it to actually share knowledge, but also, for example, present something which is otherwise too complex and not really approachable. And we often hear that, for example, people say, I couldn't possibly speak on a podcast about this product because it's too complicated. But that is exactly what makes podcasts so unique, because you can talk about complex topics and you can really take the time for clarification and nuance. You can tell the backstories and you can always add to it and really tell the story as a whole rather than just present a single individual aspect. And I think it's also nice that, unlike in traditional marketing, podcasts can really dive into technical subjects while still feeling accessible. So, for example, you can talk about a specific form of microscopy and tell the story of how the microscopes were developed and how it's applied, rather than having to talk about all the kind of physical and optical properties in great detail. And so podcast, I think, is very nice, as you said, because it has this aspect of entertainment, but also educating the listenership. And so from kind of a marketing perspective, I think it's also important to say that when we talk about how to position a podcast as a service for a company, a podcast is great because it really can span different aspects in the marketing funnel. So just, for example, when we look at awareness, which sits on top of the funnel, we can use a podcast to introduce a company, the team, and the product in a very approachable fashion. If we then look a little bit further into the consideration stage of a marketing funnel, we can use a podcast to explain a specific topic or talk about a specific form of expertise. And when we look at the conversion stage, which is at the bottom of the funnel, we can really talk about how a podcast can build the trust between the customers and the companies. And so it really spans this marketing funnel from awareness, consideration to conversion of the customers. And as you mentioned, if a podcast is done right, it can also be evergreen content and it can be reused and repurposed. And I think when you produce one piece of podcast, it can produce up to 300 pieces of content. And that is obviously amazing if you think of it from the marketing perspective, because if you can have 300 pieces of content from one single major podcast piece, then that is amazing because you can reuse, recycle, you can do a lot of A/B testing and really repurpose as much as possible from a single podcast that you have produced. But also, obviously, if you think about a podcast on a longer term, you can think about how you can use a podcast to raise the profile of the company, but also how you can establish yourself as a key opinion leader. For example, how you can set yourself apart against your competitors. And I think that is what really makes podcast really, really powerful. And we think about it, for example, when we look at our own Keep It Science podcast here at Zeeks. We have been featured on BBC Radio this year twice, which is amazing as a really small company, but that shows how strong a podcast can be and how powerful it can be to establish it or establish yourself as a key opinion leader. So I think there's a lot to say about podcasts, obviously, but I think what is also important is that we will complement the podcast as a service offer with all the other offers that we have at Outbound Pharma. So maybe, Claudio, you can talk a little bit more about how our offers will complement each other.
Yep. Well, that's amazing. I mean, what you have also been able to achieve is quite remarkable with these podcasts. One of the strongest features, in my opinion, is their versatility. So podcasts are really a wonderful, versatile complement to other inbound marketing channels. So think webinars, think newsletters, and of course, all of the outbound activities. By sharing stories through podcast, we will be able to educate the audience and naturally attract clients that are looking for the expertise or services that you offer. So what it does is actually multiple things. It helps to build credibility. It helps to position your company as a thought leader. It helps you to expand reach and also nurture a relationship with potential clients. So it's a beautiful, versatile channel. You can use it in multiple ways to diversify your outreach. As you said before, you can do interviews, you can do roundtables, you can demonstrate case studies and share real-world success stories. You can do solo episodes where you can talk about, you can offer insights, you can talk about trends, and also Q&A sessions. So I think this is really going to be a very powerful partnership, and we look forward to working closely with you to help more of our clients.
I'm so excited to get this partnership going. Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth.
Thank you very much. Likewise, excited.
Today we have seen how this partnership between Outbound Pharma and Zeeks is set to bring a fresh approach to science communication, particularly through podcast. Our combined expertise will help scientific companies engage their audiences and share their innovations with clarity and impact. So if you're interested in learning about how we can help your company with science podcasts, you can either contact Outbound Pharma or Zeeks directly for a free initial consultation. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye, tschüss, arrivederci, and do widzenia.